Hi, welcome to the Go-Go Juice podcast. I'm Day.
And I'm Giulia, and this is your go-to dose of girl talk. Podcast day is always a good day. And today is podcast day.
Today is podcast day.
Not only today is podcast day, today we have a guest.
We do have a guest. We have a very exciting guest in the studio today.
Another flatmate, another friend, another publishing girly.
We have Aadya in the studio today. She's one of our best friends. She's one of our flatmates. She's on the batch with us for the MA Publishing. And there is little we could have done this year without her. So we're very happy to have her here in the studio today.
I'm sure the conversation is going to flow with Aadya because I have one memory from my birthday, actually. I was organizing my birthday party. I was a bit worried. I was like, should I get any board games for my party? Should I organize something more? I'm afraid we're going to get bored. And Aadya was like, don't worry, you know us. We always end up talking for hours. We never get bored of chatting. So I think that today is going to be the same. We would have 100 things to talk with her, but we're going to talk specifically about books, romance, reading, male reading habits. So that's going to be really interesting. But yeah, we introduced her as a friend, as a flatmate, as a publishing girl. How would you introduce yourself, Aadya?
That's already a good enough introduction, I think. And I don't think I could give myself an introduction better than what you guys already did. At the same time, hi, I'm Aadya. I'm in MA Publishing with your two podcast hosts. And I'm from India. That's probably the only thing I can say. Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about books today, do you want to tell us about any books you've been reading lately or like your favorite genres to read?
I'm not too picky on genres to read, so I do read a bit of everything. But books I've been reading recently, I just finished rereading Hunger Games.
That's right, yeah.
Before that, the new book I read was Veer Das's autobiography, which he's a comedian that I have told both of you guys about. But yeah, that's my recent reading list.
Very nice.
That's really cool. We are going to focus on romance though today. And I think it all started with your dissertation topic. So as you guys know, we're getting into dissertation period. We're going to really focus on that and our researches. And Aadya is going to research something really, really cool that she's really passionate about. And it's something really topical, I think, right now in the industry. So would you introduce us a bit in your dissertation topic?
So my dissertation title is Romance and Literary Fiction. One wins prizes and one sells. So which is considered literature? The topic is sort of focuses on the disparity between romance and literary fiction. As we in publishing know, romance keeps the industry alive. It's what keeps the industry afloat in terms of money. However, literary fiction is what wins prizes. Something like a Booker Prize or something like a Pen Translates Award is generally always won by a literary fiction. There is also a connotation of literary value attached to it, whereas romance is very undervalued as a genre in terms of literary value. One of the coincidences, which I don't think is a coincidence, which is what the dissertation is about, is that romance is a genre that is typically commercialized, yes, but it is also a lot about feelings. Versus literary fiction was, to a certain extent, always represented by the high intelligence that is taken around it and associated with men, whereas romance was associated very heavily with women. The way it's branded, marketed, and sold to us is also inherently very different. And I think the base of that lies in the audience it's marketed towards, which we can get into, but the dissertation is sort of about looking into why, unlike every other industry, the one thing that sells the best doesn't win the most prizes.
It's a really weird disparity because when you go on to Book Talk or Bookstagram, you see 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a romance or a romantasy book that's having that like moment in social media, and it's what's generating most of the sales, and like you said, it's keeping the industry afloat. But then it doesn't translate into the accolades that the books are given. So I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think you already touched a lot of points that we're going to go in deeply into the conversation. And it's so frustrating to think that romance is so popular. Romance sells, as you said, millions of people read romances. So I'm asking myself, why is it denied the same respect given to, for example, literary fiction? Does it mean the popularity is separated from literary value? But also, is it just romance? Because every other popular genre and book is not treated the same way that romance is. So is it because, as you said, it's associated to women, or is there another reason?
I mean, I know which way I'm leaning, but Aadya, I know you've been already doing some of your research and preparation for the dissertation, so I'd love to hear your thoughts first before I kind of spitball my own.
I feel like one genre that we can typically look at if we want to look at the gendered aspect of it is sci-fi, because a lot of the connotation behind the bias that we see towards romance is that it's related to feelings, yes, but also the fact that it's made up, which it's fiction. Everything's made up. But sci-fi is something that's, I wouldn't say completely dominated by men reading, but to a certain extent, sure. And sci-fi does not get the same disrespect or the same shame attached to it that romance often gets. And I think that inherently is biased. I don't think that that's 99% of the reason. I think that can be selected and looked at in terms of maybe things like literary value. What is art? What do we consider art? And there can be many more questions. But I think a majority of the reason that we see the bias within fiction and within genres itself is definitely gendered.
Okay. I would agree with that. I think it also maybe comes into like EQ and IQ.
I think EQ and IQ is such a nice way to put it, because it's like which one is considered more important in today's society
Yeah.
when honestly we should have a balance, right? A balance should be expected, but we consider one of the two more important in even today's society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very inherent bias of which one we consider more important.
Yeah, I think that might be a little bit what it is. I think people associate EQ with women and IQ maybe with men. And so then if you're writing in a way that leans into emotional intelligence, it's considered to be a more feminine reading experience. And then that's where that maybe disconnect comes from. I don't know. Giulia, what do you think about that?
I think this really brings us into something that Aadya and I were discussing yesterday. It's all about emotions. And we were talking about the society we're in at the moment. And it almost feels like sadness and trauma are treated as more valuable emotions than happiness and joy and love. It almost feels like life nowadays has to be associated with sad emotions. And that's what literary fiction is. Literary fiction is complexity, is pain, is trauma. Romance is hope, is love.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually really interesting to me to think how we ended up thinking about love and hope and those positive emotions as less complex. I sometimes feel like romance is looked down at also because for someone could be not comfortable to think about women openly reading about love and desire. But does it mean that that emotion is less complex and less valuable? Is it what we're saying?
That's a really good
You know what I
point.
mean?
No, I know what you mean. And everyone knows that I love Emily Henry. I love her books. I cannot stop talking about her to save my life. But she did do an interview a couple of months ago because she's doing a lot of book to movie adaptations. And she was getting a lot of grief from people saying like, well, why are all of your romances, they all have the happy ending? And yes, that's kind of a trademark of the genre, right? Everybody wants their HEA. But people were saying for the adaptations, shouldn't you lean into those quote unquote more complex themes? And she was saying kind of what you're saying, Giulia, that these happier emotions or the brighter emotions aren't any less complex than those on the other half of the wheel. They're all complex emotions because we're complex people feeling them.
I feel like I can really actually relate to that statement because I feel like we forget what real life looks like when we're reading a book. And I feel like people disassociate happy endings with complex, the word complex. And that sort of draws into, we've all seen relationships, whether that's our friendships, whether those are like romantic relationships. Are they less complex to keep alive, people? We know they're extremely complex to keep alive, especially happy.
Yeah.
Which requires a lot of communication, a lot of conversation. So I feel like saying that a happy ending is less complex almost is disassociating with reality.
Yes.
Because in reality, happier endings are so much harder to keep alive.
Yeah.
And like, it requires a lot of work to get there and to make it believable for the audience that this is truly a happy ending. We all know that if it's not truly the happy ending as a reader that we see plausible, we will debate about that book for years and years to come.
Yeah.
So to make a book that keeps a happy ending alive in a very plausible way, that readers can buy into it and think, no, this is truly a happy ending. And we reflect that back to reality, and we know reality is hard to keep happy. I think itself shows that it's a very complex emotion. And sort of drawing back to what you were talking about, which we discussed yesterday, one of the things that I actually talked about with you also is why is pain, like trauma and all these things from like the 90th century, art meant expressing your grief, your pain, what the reality of life was like. And I know I said reality of life, but why is reality of life supposed to be sad? Like, reality of life could be happy. It's not like all of us are always sad. There are happy and there is sad. Like, it's a mix of emotions. And I think that the answer for that is something that was said to me by a professor yesterday, which is anger and trauma and pain are sort of the high intelligence, I am doing an art form kind of emotions that come from the 90th century, and they are extremely masculine in nature. That also draws into a very gendered bias that we look at the way emotions, like we've said this before, anger is an emotion.
It's a valuable emotion.
It's a very valuable emotion. And I know certain people don't treat anger as an emotion, but pain is an emotion. So it's not less emotional if you make it angry or painful.
All of the emotions that we feel are connected in some way or another to a different emotion. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, but there are emotion wheels, and I will talk about it.
I saw Inside Out. Does it count?
Well, kind of, yeah.
The little bubbles that have two colors.
Yes,
in
okay,
it.
so that's actually a perfect example because, like, if you're thinking about Inside Out and some of the memories have been touched by both joy and sadness, right? That in and of itself breeds a different emotion altogether. It's bittersweet. It's nostalgia. Right. All of these larger blanket terms we have for emotions are really just umbrella statements for every other emotion that's under that sun. And I think to kind of go into that idea of like the realities of life, and it has to be hard and it has to be complicated, I think that maybe comes, yes, also from the gender bias, but the gender bias that writers put on themselves as authors of the work rather than the work itself. And what I mean by that is I think it's maybe pretty common for people to think about that starving, depressed artist trope that historically has proven true in a lot of situations, but specifically with men. And so I think with male authors, when they are writing, if they do not feel like they're producing a work that has come out of that place, then maybe the work was less meaningful because they didn't have to quote unquote struggle as much to create that work. And then when they see predominantly female writers writing romance, they don't have to go into that dark place to recognize the complexity of the happier emotions. There's like a disconnect, a dissonance that happens between the two mental attitudes.
I agree, but I also feel like this is not just like this is an author conversation. I think it's also an audience conversation. I think it's also your readership that looks at you expecting a certain thing from a certain genre. And I feel like the reason because of that is because we've defined literary value as pain and suffering. If your audience is looking at you expecting pain and suffering and you don't deliver, and we know there are genre tropes and conventions, right? So like if you're looking at a romance and you don't deliver a happy ending, or you're looking at a literary fiction and you don't deliver like that one climax where everything goes to absolute shit and like it's miserable for everyone, then you're sort of not going as per the tropes that the genre has. And I feel like the audience expects that of you, so the authors also somehow have to deliver on them, which I do agree is really unfair for authors because that's putting them in a box when creativity is not supposed to be like that.
Okay, so something that I'm thinking about now then, after all that you said. There's 3 human beings here in this room, and we're saying that we do not believe that emotions such as joy and love are less complex, but actually they do require a lot of work as well. So does it mean that what I said before about the society treating emotions such as sadness and painful emotions as deeper is not true? And what is happening here is that we have a mix of what you said, in the sense that me as a reader picking up a romance book, expecting that genre to give me positive emotions, is then a bit of an issue that comes from the industry, in the sense that the industry is telling us that these emotions are less intellectual than pain and trauma, and it connects to what they were saying about the whole
like the starving artist kind of trope.
So is it you as an industry telling me, no, pick up that book because that is more intellectual and that is gonna win prizes, while romance is just gonna be looked down to?
like you said, we all agree that love is a complex emotion. That's literally our first episode. Love is complicated, and so are we. So I am glad we still all feel that way. But I would say, are you saying, Giulia, that maybe it's a less of a problem that's being presented by only one side of the book ecosystem? It's maybe the whole ecosystem itself?
I guess
Like the problems
so.
coming from the readers and the writers and industry expectations.
I guess so. I think it's a lot of the industry expectations at this point. It's everyone, because the industry is giving prizes just to literary fiction. The readers that do not read romances look at romances as a less valuable form of literature, and sometimes they even say it's not real reading.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Here you
Oh,
go.
yeah, same.
Writers, why do we just have, not just, but we mostly have women who write romances? Does it mean that men feel like they cannot write about desire and they should just write about sadness and what we said and like trauma? I feel like it's all of them all together. But I do not understand how we got here. Is it just like something really related to women and the perception that the society has of women and women reading about love and desire?
Okay, so I think I can really chip in to that question. So as far as men writing romance goes, I have said this to both of you, but my research basically indicated till a certain point, men writing romance would often get termed as literary fiction. Because they would not write romance the way that is almost expected of women. Like when men would write romance, it would be almost considered high intellectual. Like we all have literally one author we can name who truly writes romance and we know it's romance. And even he has themes of loss and grief in his romance books. Yes, we are talking about Nicholas Sparks. But I think the concept here is that I don't necessarily think that we are just being pushed these tropes. I think there's an inherent problem of shame attached to the kind of reading that we are doing. And I know it's a mix of both problems. I think the reason, yes, men are not writing romances as much is probably because of the high intellectual expectations from them, which are very patriarchal and biased expectations. However, it's also because when they do write romance, it ends up being classified as a literary fiction. And second, yes, there is inherent shame attached to reading romance fiction. And I think this I can say from personal experience, and I don't know if this is regularly anyone else's experience, but at home in India, there would be times where I would be reading a romance and I would always have, and this is a common experience, I would always have a backup book. My backup book was To Kill a Mockingbird. Because when your like aunts and uncles know you're a reader, they'll come up to you and be like, so which book are you reading these days?
Yeah, yep.
And you can never say a romance. Like you cannot. And I didn't understand why that was a thing, or maybe I didn't even think it was something wrong up until I came here and saw everyone talking so openly about romance and romanticy. And I thought, oh, it's supposed to be normal to read these books. And it just isn't. I'm not saying that that's the common experience of everyone in India, but I have at least faced that. And I've seen that, you know, like having a backup book was just something you did. And you didn't discuss these things with, like, you discussed it with your friends, but anyone older, and there was an inherent shame attached to reading romance, almost as if it was something wrong. Which ties into your earlier point, Giulia, about women's desire just being seen as something that was slightly more shameful. And I think we may have not gotten rid of those expectations as much as we think we have.
Maybe we think we're a bit more progressive than we are in actuality. I do think the shame factor is very real. I've heard it from my sister. I've heard it from my friends. I've experienced it where it's like, you know, you go to sit on a bus and you go to pull out your book and you know if you pull out like Lynn Painter, Abby Jimenez, Emily Henry, whoever.
Romances.
Exactly. Somebody's going to kind of look at you and be like, why are you reading that? But can't it be for emotional learning? Can't it be to feel those positive experiences? But there's that shame that's attached to wanting to have a positive experience rather than suffer through your literature experience.
I said it before in an episode, but I'm a big believer in the fact that reading a romance really helps you learn about relationships and how to navigate a lot of things that you wouldn't feel otherwise. And that's in literature in general. Every time you pick up a book, you're gonna learn a different life story without having to experience it. Also, I did a bit of a research that I think it connects to this whole conversation.
Beautiful.
We just said that, and it's true, that there's still kind of this shame attached to reading a romance. So if we as women feel that shame, how would men feel picking up a romance book? Because let's be real. So I asked myself, okay, I know romance is associated with women, but is it only read by women? Because honestly, in my life, I don't want to generalize, but none of the men that I personally know read romances. I did a bit of a research. And it's actually from 2017, so it's not that recent. But I found out from Romance Writers of America that romance readers are 82% women and 18% men. That's not a lot.
It's not a lot.
It still means that the genre is heavily gendered. But, men do read it too. So if men do read romance, why are they less visible as romance reader? I truly feel that if us as women feel the shame, how could a man living in this society where masculinity just means to appear strong and to appear emotionally controlled, how could a man pick up a book where there's a cowboy and a girl making out in the cover? Or even just the industry, again, is marketing it for women. The marketing part of it, the book cover, all the social expectations that I talked about. I feel like they're having a hard time there as well, you know?
Yeah, it is kind of a branding question when you think about it, because I think it would be easily remedied if we did have more men writing romance that was marketed as romance. You could take most books, pull it off of the shelf, whatever shelf you got it from, fantasy, thriller, sci-fi. There's subtropes of another genre in that book. And the only reason that book has been placed on that specific shelf is because a team of people sat around a giant oval table in an office and decided, we're going to label this as XYZ. And I think if we had more men writing the romances and they were put on that shelf instead of lit fic, then I think maybe some of that bias or that shame associated with it would go away. I also wonder if it has to do with the fact that in a lot of romances that I've read, because I do read romances written by male presenting authors, and there's not a lot of them that I've found that I've really enjoyed, but I think the difference for me between enjoying it and not enjoying it is the accuracy of representation, because the man can always be the man and the woman can always be the man, but the woman can be the woman and the man can't be the woman. It's a difference in how the characters and the tropes of the relationship itself are featured. Am I making sense? Is this making sense?
Yes, you are. I agree with you, and there are parts where I disagree with you. So I completely agree with you. There is a social expectation, and maybe having more male authors that write romance that's marketed and branded as romance would really help. At the same time, I feel like in an industry where we're seeing we have more female authors these days.
True.
I feel like in an industry like that, I don't know whether a switch to male authors writing more romance would be necessarily the best solution. I feel like the best solution is to look at how we can make it inclusive without changing our visibility of our authors. How could we make the marketing more exclusive? We've all seen our romantasy books look a certain way.
Yeah, they all have that same cover.
We've been to classes for cover design within our publishing MA and looked at why they are marketed a certain way, why they are branded a certain way, why the cover is a certain way. So then the question sort of remains, are we excluding people from the conversation because we want to market it to our audience, our target audience? Which, as I have talked to you guys about, entertainment industry is the only industry in the world that does not market towards its actual core readership, but markets towards the audience not reading it. And you guys know this, but I worked in PR before. I have a marketing background. There is no other industry that focuses more on targeting a reader that does not read than targeting on a reader that's basically their target market or their target audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like changing the industry around romance to get more men to read romance would also be unfair to the genre in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're not, again, there's a conversation if you're not letting authors write what they want to write.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe the more fair expectation could be to change the branding in a way that's more inclusive,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of who the author is, whether they're male presenting or female presenting.
That's true. That's very true. And those are all excellent points. And I do agree with you that it is a lot to do with the branding question. I just wonder if maybe we think that men don't want to be writing romances and they do. I wonder if more of them do want to be writing them that they are.
I feel like, as we said in the beginning, it's a mix of so many different touch points
Mm-hmm.
that it ends up making the romance looks as a feminine
Mm-hmm.
activity, like reading romances as a feminine activity, not only from a reader's point of view, but also from a writer's point of view. So where do you have to end up? Like, there's so many touching points that you should have to kind of change and mold around a bit.
Mm-hmm.
That where do you start to make the romance look less feminine if it's so connected to so many things?
Yeah.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like another thing that just popped into my head as you were saying that is like, why are we trying to make romance look less feminine? We're not trying to make sci-fi look less masculine. Like, you know what I mean?
Are we
Like,
just in a sexist society?
Well,
aren't we?
No,
Do I
we're
have
not
to cut
sorry,
this?
actually.
Cut.
We're not sorry. No, it's okay to call
It's
things
okay.
out. It's okay to call things out.
Okay.
We do live in a society that has a lot of sexist themes and undertones to a lot of everyday
Yeah,
experiences. And it's
because
fine
the more
and
we
important to
talk-
point it out.
Yeah, the more we talk, the more that's the only reason that I can come up with.
Yeah.
Because as Aadya said, why, like, I don't care about picking up a sci-fi book, even if it's like marketed, because there are some like sci-fi books that are marketed for men, full stop.
Oh,
As there are
100%.
romance books that are marketed for women, full stop. But I do not have a problem picking up a sci-fi that is marketed for men.
oh, no, this is reminding me of a lecture we all went to.
Oh, okay.
Our professor who came in as a guest lecture for our children's book author.
Oh.
And
I love her.
for our listeners, we had a guest lecturer come in who was a children's book author. And she talked about having to change the cover of her book and the story because she wrote a story around two sisters because that's what she had. She had a sister and it was essentially a story of children going on an adventure together. And when she walked into a meeting, she was told by the board that she would have to change it to be one girl and one boy because she would be cutting out 50% of her audience by having it be two sisters because boys' parents would not pick up or boys would not pick up a story with it being two girls on the cover. However, if it were two boys on the cover, girls would still pick it up and girls' parents would still pick it up.
See, and that is such a good point because it's so true. Like from my time working in classrooms, I would go around and we do like an ERLA reading rainbow kind of situation. So kids are assigned different colors based on their reading levels, which has a couple different problematic layers to it itself, but this is not an education podcast. But what I will say is that like I could go around with the bins and if I handed one of the little kids like a book that wasn't immediately identifiable as like being severely outrageously pushed or overtly pushed towards them and their identity, they're not picking it up. There's no way they're picking it up. Like you have to write those into the syllabus to get the kids to blend it. That's such a good point.
I feel like we're trying here to make a difference, right? But at the same time, we're actively just half of the population trying to make a difference, and the difference needs to come from the other end. And like one thing we talked about in our lecture is children are not inherently biased.
No.
So children might not even have the ideas in their head, but like we as parents are biased. Like we're handing our children these books that are our thinkings and our sort of undertones of the society. And then we sort of inculcate that in them. And then we move forward, look back, and we're like, but I didn't do that. Like, I didn't teach them. No, you didn't, but you handed them a book which doesn't have two girls on the cover.
It's subliminal messaging.
Yeah.
Kids pick up just as much of what you don't put down in front of them as you do put down in front of them. The kids pick up the gaps and they fill them. And that's why it's important to put down so much that there's less gaps for the kids to then fill in with that subliminal messaging.
And I feel like you would agree with me on this, but kids are very emotionally intelligent in ways we don't recognize.
Oh, 100%.
So if we are not doing something, actively not doing something, or actively not trying not to talk about a topic, they will also recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is one of those situations where, you know, like you talked about a sci-fi cover being actively marketed to men. None of us have a problem with picking that up.
No, none.
And I'm going to talk about this book series because this popped into my head, but Harry Potter has a boy on the cover. I have never thought of that as a reason
so
to not pick
true.
up Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I do know that a lot of Harry Potter's readership is mixed. There's a lot of women that have read Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we've ever seen that as a problem to not pick Harry Potter. Hunger Games, on the other hand, does not have a woman on the cover. It has a female lead, but we don't have a woman on the cover.
Yeah.
No, we don't.
And there is a lot of
Suzanne
men.
Collins has a very specific branding that she went for with that series.
And I'm not saying it's not about the branding, but I'm trying to say that I know a lot of men who've read Hunger Games and have had no problems reading that book. However, it's actively there that a female lead is not on the cover, which, as we know, the industry does want female leads to be on the cover when they are female leads.
Yes, they
so
do.
that they can show off that there is female representation. So that's sort of very obvious messaging.
And it's making me ask myself, so would your male friends have read Hunger Games anyways if the cover was different? And
Probably not.
Here you go.
Sorry to all my guy friends, but like probably not.
No, but that's so true. It's the same for me. I'm having like a really random but similar example in my head. One friend back in middle school when the whole dystopian hype was happening read the Hunger Games series. As we know, the Divergent series is kind of similar in the dystopian vibe, but at least for the Italian edition, there was the female lead on the cover. That male friend of mine didn't pick up the Divergent series, just picked up the Hunger Games and loved it and would have loved Divergent because it's the same vibe, it's the same genre, it's the same
YA dystopian fiction.
Exactly. And that's really, really interesting.
It
How
does.
many generations do we need to erase these now?
I feel like we're moving maybe towards it. I know that I can sit down. Actually, the night before I left to come to Exeter, I sat down and like years ago, I couldn't have sat down to talk about the romances that I'm reading with either of my parents. I sat there 4 hours talking about the Fourth Wing series with my mom, and it was so fun. Or I'll go and I'll call my dad and we'll talk about Brandon Sanderson. And Brandon Sanderson actually does incorporate a lot of romantic themes into his writing. And like my dad doesn't shy away from that. So I do think slowly we are moving in that direction. I just think maybe and it goes kind of back to what you said earlier, Aadya, we think we're more progressive than we actually are. And then there's that cognitive dissonance of, wait, but I thought we were past that. Well, we're actively actually maybe 3 or 4 steps behind where we think we are.
And I think what you just said, it sort of ties back to the whole aspect of talking to a readership that's not our target audience. Like, and I don't know where this came from, and I've talked to you guys about the fact that women spend more in any area of entertainment than men. In terms of buying power, women hold more buying power in on entertainment industries. However, the industry markets towards men. And by this, I mean for music, there's merchandise, tickets, concerts. Women spend more on their emotional happiness than men do. And it's just regularly true. It's been seen. It is the same with books. Women will buy merchandise for books if it makes them happy. The scenario there then is it that we as a female audience will buy things anyway, so we're taken for granted a little bit? Is there like a cognizant understanding of the fact that even if they market it towards men, we will still buy what we like? So it's okay to market it towards men.
I just feel like I need a minute to process what you said, because I think there's a lot of truth ringing in those sentences.
Absolutely, so true.
I feel like the simple fact in and of itself that we're sitting here having this conversation proves that it's something that we're all thinking about. Like, we were really excited when we were sitting down and we thought, this is the topic that we want to talk about. And it's something that I think will resonate with a lot of different people, whether they are male presenting or female presenting or non-binary. Like, I think this is something that a lot of people will be very interested in as a topic. And I think you can see that even through the books that do go viral, that maybe talk on these a little bit. Beach Read, that's the entire premise of Beach Read, is a romance author and a lit fic author are stuck on a beach together. They're in their separate cabins, and neither one has a lot of respect for the other person's genre, so they decide to switch projects. He has to write a, like, sweep you off your feet, very love-infused, bodice ripper kind of a romance, and she needs to write a really gritty, boots-on-the-ground journalistic type of lit fic. They come to respect each other and the genres and the audiences more for it, and that was easily one of the most popular books of, I think, 2020, 2021. So I think this is just, we're moving
Slowly but surely.
slowly but surely.
This is reminding me of this one place that I went to for a talk. So, as there was like a panel, and as they were talking about, you know, like they were discussing books and talking about the audiences that read books, one of the things they were talking about is how children are not reading, right? Which is something I was completely okay with as a topic, and I was like really excited to hear the panel's opinions about them. And it slowly transitioned into why are men not reading and how can we get men to read, which I was really uncomfortable with as a topic because I was like, boys is fine. Those are children. You want children to read. But when actively as an industry, we're going and searching for audiences that don't like our stuff and abandoning audiences that do like what we're already doing. As a PR major, that sounds like a disaster to me. Like, you know, like as a PR person, you're like, if you abandon your target market and audience and they also leave you, then you have no one left. And the idea that we need to be more male-centric for men to read inherently seems really wrong to me. We should be the way we are and then invite them to read our content anyways, and that's progress and that's equality. Being male-centric to get them to read is sort of pandering to the delights of what being biased and like patriarchy is all about. You know, like it's really inherently sort of going back to the idea that we have to pander to a male audience to get them to do what we want and to get them to spend on us and to get them to buy our books. But we don't need to do that for a female audience because they'll listen anyways. So it's sort of like very like, and this reminds me of a lot of conversations I've seen happen, not just around books, but it's inherently like we don't need to put in effort into women because they're going to read anyways. Like they're going to be our forever audience anyways. And I think that the industry has a wrong idea of that. Because I think even women will eventually get tired of having to read the same kind of literature again and again and again. When we all know we just want good stories and good books. And I think a male reader, and I might be wrong here, a male reader would be able to tell me better. But I think any reader, even a male reader, just wants good stories. They don't want to be looked at with like a view or a lens of how can we cater to these people and give them stories that fit inside a little box. Because who wants to read stories that fit inside a little box anyways?
Yes.
We don't want the story in a box, but we do want it in a book, and we want as many books as we can get our hands on. But I do want to say, Aadya, you bring up a really interesting point that the publishing industry is part of the entertainment industry. And you said that books aren't the only place that we're seeing this disconnect with the audiences and genre. And so I want to kind of maybe see if we could talk about the other place that I think the three of us have noticed this especially throughout the last year, which is in movies.
Wow.
And seeing the difference in movies. And
Can we
actually, and I want to hear Giulia, I'd love to hear you talk about this first because you are the author of our movie list in The Flat. And
okay, let's explain the movie list.
Yeah, can you explain?
That's actually the reason why I started asking myself this. I started asking myself, what difference does the medium make between books and movies for romance stories? So we have a movie list up in our flat that we created because there's some movies that some of us feel strongly about and we cannot believe that some other people in the flat didn't ever see them before. So, for example, La La Land, Interstellar that we talked about, or as simple as Titanic. What else do we have?
That's
just
me.
really like core movies that you gotta watch at least once in your life. So we started with the basic movies, with the pillars of the industry, and then everyone could really openly just add anything that they wanted to the movie list, a movie that they loved and they wanted everyone else to watch and to enjoy. So now we come to the point where I do have some male flatmates, and they, with their own willpower, freedom of expression, they added to the list some romance movies that are just romance full stop. It's not like romance and adventure, romance and... Like one of my flatmates added 10 Days of Summer, is it called?
Oh,
Now,
the 500 Days of Summer.
500 Days of Summer. Now, come here to me and tell me that that is not just a romance.
No, it is. It's
Without
100% just romance.
any shame, he added it to the list. So, what's the difference? It's just showing me that male do enjoy romances and they need romance stories in their life as much as we do. Why can't it be the same for books? I feel like films can be less gendered and less embarrassing because they're exposing you less in the terms of marketing, as we said. Reading a romance book is visibly identifying yourself as a romance reader. Watching a movie is not at exposing yourself, also because people could just say they're interested in the director, in the music, in the actors. It's not that grounded in the love story. Like, you can get away with it if you want to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So why is there this difference at the end of the day if the core of it is just me, as we said, in an entertaining industry, I am picking myself a romance story as a movie to watch with my flatmates.
See, you said that beautifully, first off. That was really, really well said. And I want to maybe kind of take and pull from what you were talking about, because you said if you are seen reading a romance, that then denotes you a romance reader. It like sticks that label on you. Everybody knows that's your thing, right? But also romance readers read a lot of other things. But with movies, in order to be a cinephile, right? Someone who really loves cinema and loves movies and loves to talk about them, the more well-rounded you are in what you watch, like the better, and I'm doing air quotes here, a cinephile that you are. Or the more respected you are because you have seen everything. You have this wealth of knowledge about movies. So I think maybe there's something about that you could say. But also, when you're reading a book, do you guys picture it in your head, what you're reading?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. You do as well? When you're watching a movie, you don't have to picture it. You don't have to create that painting for yourself. Everything's provided for you. All the tools you need to see the story from start to finish is filled. You have the backtracks, the soundtrack for the movie, which adds a lot of, I would say, sway in how you interpret a scene.
Yes.
You have the actors, you have the director, you have all of the editing, the lighting, and none of that is present in the reading experience. You have to create that for yourself. So I wonder if it's easier to enjoy romance as a movie because the romance is handed to you packaged. Whereas in a romance book, you have to actively kind of stitch it together yourself.
To both do things from what you said to what I identified with Julia's conversation also. First, I remember when we did a PPT night at the flat, Giulia talked about reading. And within that, one of the things she talked about was why people get mad when a book adaptation is not as good as a movie, like the movie is not as good as the book, because we picture and make a whole world of the book. And when that lot of lived movie that we've already made up for a book in our head is not the same as the movie that comes out, it sort of changes the way we get mad because it's not the movie we've watched before in our head. And just connecting to that, to what you said about, it being packaged and handed to you, I feel like then part of the conversation we're having here is romance fine to watch because books are written much more detailed and personally than movies are shown. I can think of a lot of romances when I was reading the book. It was a lot more personal and from a first point of view than compared to the same movie. Like, watching the movie, it was personal, but it was not as sort of intimate as the book sort of becomes. And I feel like that might be part of the conversation. Drawing this back to shame, because I'm sensing a theme here, is there is a shame attached with women's desire and women's happiness, because a lot of romances truly are based from a woman's point of view, and they're inherently drawing on women's experiences. And if we as women feel shame reading those things, I think men also feel a sense of shame reading them for different reasons, but similar connotations. Like, there is inherently a shame attached with women's desire. We're only supposed to express desire when a man asks us to. And books don't do that. Books very inherently tie into the concept of women's desires their own, especially in romances. So I feel like when they're reading it, it's a lot more intimate Whereas when they're watching a film, it's not as intimate because it's packaged right for you to understand or take as much of the emotion that you need to and not go into as depth of the conversation. Going back to what you said about being a cinephile, being well rounded, I wonder why then that's not a conversation for being a reader.
Yes.
Why shouldn't you be well rounded? Like, why shouldn't you be reading autobiographies and like non-fictions and like different types of fictions, romance included, to be well rounded as a reader? Why is that not a requirement? Because I have heard a lot of men call themselves readers and well rounded readers, and I know for a fact that most of them do not read romance. So then, how exactly are you well rounded? And yes, I know there's a lot of genres, guys. I am aware of that. But romance is the best selling genre out there.
It is.
So if you are not reading one of basically what is the top identifier of books, then how are you well rounded as a reader?
And what you said about a lot of romance movies being from a feminine perspective, that's really interesting then, since we were
That's
talking
interesting.
about...
I didn't think about it,
Yeah,
but that's so true.
because you're talking about the movie on the list being 500 Days of Summer. And exactly, that's kind of my point. It's like 500 Days of Summer actually is not from the feminine perspective. It's from the masculine perspective.
Oh, that's true.
La La Land.
Oh, jeez.
Oh god.
It's uncomfortable now.
Isn't that
I'm joking.
kind of interesting?
Yes.
And then La La Land kind of bounces back and
Yes.
forth. You get Mia and Sebastian.
Yeah.
You don't stay in either character's headspace for the duration of the movie. 500 Days of Summer, you do. You're in the masculine
Yeah.
headspace.
Ouch.
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 Yeah.
I feel like we could open up another whole episode now because I thought about something else that it's just something that came to my mind. I'm picturing my flatmates watching those movies. And something really interesting to me is that they didn't have a problem crying in front of us, watching a romance movie and being emotional in front of us. So, what does it mean? Because does it mean that are we back to the masculine conversation and to what society needs men to do in the sense of being strong and being emotionally controlled and not showing their emotions? But the fact that they don't have a problem watching a romantic movie, and on top of that, they don't have a problem showing that they get emotional about a love story in front of other people, what does it say then? Does it say that we are putting like the first foot out the door, that we're getting there? Does it mean again that movies are an easier medium for them to explore that emotional side of them? Does it mean nothing? Do we need to do another episode about it?
I don't know. It makes me think about that one line in the Barbie movie where
Yeah.
Ken is crying on Barbie's bed at the end, and she's like, "It's okay to cry." And he says, "I'm a liberated man. I know it's not weak to cry."
Oh.
Yeah.
But it's kind of said in this way that's meant to be very much like, "Men, did you hear that? Please feel free. There's nothing wrong with crying." But it's also said in kind of a poking fun at it kind of way, which I think is really an interesting dichotomy, because I want men to be emotionally available to themselves.
Yeah.
We need men to be emotionally available to themselves. And I think slowly, societally, we're finding those permissions. But I think until, and what I just call it, permission, right? That's, I think, the problem. We're asking somebody for permission for her own feelings and cognitive experiences when there is no permission to be asked for. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. I also, one really interesting things that I sort of got into while you guys were talking about it. We talked about emotional availability. And I just find it really interesting that we talked about them crying and them relating to movies that were written from an inherently male perspective. We also cried and related to the movies. Is it that men relate much better when looking at it from a male perspective, but women relate either way?
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I know it's about emotional intelligence, and women, in a very more like biased way, are supposed to be more emotionally available and emotionally mature. But also, I feel like, is it because it was written from a male perspective that it was easier for them to process and understand? Whereas women, who are supposed to and always are sort of almost perceptive of the male experience and male perspective, also relate either way, just regardless of which perspective it's written from. So then does it come back to a conversation of, does romance need to be changed into a masculine thinking for them to get it, for them to relate to it? You know what I mean? Like, does it then inherently come back to the perspective of, are they not relating to romance, picking up romance or reading romance because they don't relate to the female experience?
It's an empathy question.
And it's probably something, I may be wrong, but I feel like it's something they have been taught as well.
Mm-hmm.
If a book is written from a woman's point of view, it's not for you. And the other way around, as we said before, me as a woman reader, I'm not going to have a problem picking up that sci-fi book marketed for men because I'm going to be able to relate it to both. And because no one ever told me that it's not okay. I feel like to them, that thing has been told.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a really direct way, but even in a subtle way.
Well, it's like what we were talking about with the current generation of children at this moment. And there is a huge reading crisis with the current generations. But our generations were still raised on that subliminal messaging. Like I said, children pick up just as much of what you don't put down as what you do. And I think our generation is very much a byproduct of that experience and those gaps. And so I think it's incredibly fair to say all of these things can be true at the same time.
So is the inherent conversation then that is happening that men still need to relate to what were masculine emotions? Women, however, get to or are supposed to relate to both masculine and feminine emotions. Women's groups, I've rarely seen female friendships sharing each other for feeling any kind of emotions, whether that be inherently what are seen as masculine emotions or inherently feminine emotions. That's not even a conversation in female friend groups. There are no emotions that are masculine or feminine in female friend groups. However, that is a very much a conversation in male friend groups where certain emotions are seen as feminine. And for some reason, feminine has become sort of a metaphor for not desirable. Feminine emotions are not ones men should have. And then that ties back to like reading romance, because it's almost like, oh, those are feminine things. You're not supposed to do them.
I want you to any man listening to this, please go pick up a romance. Like, truly, I feel like you learn so much about yourself, and not just relationships in a romantic sense, but relationships in a platonic sense. And I would say reading romance is less to do with actual romance itself than it is understanding intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think more people need to pick up romance. This is a really, really great conversation.
I loved every second of it. I feel like we brought up some really interesting points, so I hope the people at home listening could relate as women and as men to the reading experience and the fact that it is an industry, as the movie industry. It's just entertainment. You can just get joy from it. You don't have to benefit from it in any other way. That's why entertainment industries exist. You can just plug off, read your book, enjoy, full stop. And maybe the romance is the way to go. You don't know if you don't try.
Absolutely, you don't know if you don't try it. And at the end of the day, what is a book? A human experience. That's what it is. Whether we gender it or not, books are for all of us. They're for everyone. Go pick them up. We love them. That's what we do. Thank you, Aadya.
Thank you for having me.
On life and reading romance, this was the Go Go Juice podcast.